The other night, my wife took a bottle of sparkling water out of the refrigerator, and as happens more often in my house than I care to admit, she struggled to get it open and cursed me in the gentlest sort of way for screwing the lid on too tight, yet again, of a bottle or a jar. And then she said a little something about the pain that she has chronically in her thumb that kind of goes up her forearm as far as the elbow, and how at the age of 55 she had every expectation that this was not going to get better, but probably only worse with time. And naturally, I felt bad for screwing the lid on too tight once again. But I also felt grateful and loved because she didn't bring up, as she could have done, how it was that she injured her thumb in the first place. It was 2017. And we went down to Central America for some sabbatical time, myself and my wife and my daughter. And we were in Quetzaltenango in the western highlands of Guatemala, the second city of Guatemala, studying Spanish language and staying with the host family. And at this particular language school, there was a long-standing ritual of a Thursday night soccer game. So we dutifully went over to the school and waited out in front until the Central American version of the minivan showed up. Which is to say, a pickup truck with a big iron rack kind of mounted around the bed. And depending on how many passengers you have, you either sit in the bed, or as we did on this occasion, we all stood because there was no room to sit down, and you kind of grab on to the frame, and away we went. Through the streets of Quetzaltenango with night falling to the soccer pitch, which was maybe about 3/4 regulation size with AstroTurf and big lights to illuminate it. And there was another group there playing. But promptly at 7 o'clock, the person overseeing the place, gave some kind of signal, and they all left, and he said to us, "Okay, you've got an hour." So we split up into teams, and teachers and students and some other people who, as far as we could tell, had nothing to do with the school, but liked to come and play against gringos every Thursday night. And the soccer game began. And after about 25 minutes, we were completely spent and gasping for air, because Quetzaltenango is at over 7,000 feet of elevation. And so we all took a break and sprawled on the AstroTurf and drank water, and some people had some snacks. And at that point, the fellow who'd been in the goal for our side for the first half announced that he was done playing goalie and someone else was going to have to do it now. So we all looked at each other, and nobody really wanted to play that position, but I grudgingly accepted and started playing in the goal and managed to block a few shots and let a couple more in. But it was not a comfortable place for me. Never played goalie really very much in my extremely limited soccer career. And, nobody likes to have people kicking a ball at them as hard as they can. So after, 10 or 15 minutes, I announced that I was done and said to my wife, "Now it's your turn." And she protested, but I insisted. And thus it was that attempting to block a wide shot, she took a soccer ball right on the end of her thumb, spraining it badly and sustaining an injury from which she's never completely recovered. And that's how it is for us human beings, particularly in relationships that endure over time, invariably through carelessness or mean-spiritedness or simple neglect, or for reasons that we never intended and had nothing to do with, we cause one another harm. Or we suffer harm at the hands of the people that we love. I say it's inevitable. And all you can really do is your best to make amends for the harm that has been done and to give and accept forgiveness for it. That is, as you all know, if you've been married for any length of time or ever been a child or a sibling or had a friend, forgiveness is essential. It's the key. So when Jesus shows up on the evening of the resurrection in that frightened little circle of disciples, as we heard from the Gospel of John last week, and they're hearing again this week in Luke's version of the story. And he says to them, "Peace be with you." The peace that he is extending is nothing less than the peace of God. It's the peace of God's compassion for human beings, that we are in this position of vulnerability, of being subject to getting hurt by one another. And through, again, sometimes our own fault and sometimes not, causing each other harm. And that peace that Jesus speaks to them is forgiveness. Forgiveness to them for having failed to live up to their own bravest declarations that they made to him about how they would stick with him no matter what. They would go with him to his death if need be. Declarations which he knew perfectly well they would not live up to and did not expect them to. But forgiveness not just for them, forgiveness also for the people who betrayed him quite deliberately, people who rejected him, people who were unable to hear and see that he came to them bearing the peace of God, and instead saw him as a threat or as a blasphemer, and sought to have him done away with. peace and forgiveness that Jesus offers. Coming to them not as an avenging ghost to haunt their dreams, coming not as some kind of angelic being who is impervious to pain and suffering and the effects of human sin, but coming back to them as himself, as Jesus of Nazareth, in flesh and bone and blood, bearing the marks on his body of his crucifixion, and yet alive to them, for them, in God, in a way that sets them free from the memory of their own shortcomings, sets them free to love and trust not only him, but one another, and in fact, all of humanity. The gospel says that they're filled with a joy that is at the same time bewilderment and doubt and confusion. Because how could this possibly be true? How could it possibly be true? Not only that Jesus is raised bodily from death, but that his rising to life again is God's gift to the whole world of a peace and a forgiveness, a possibility of reconciliation that can never be canceled out, can never be negated, no matter how misbegotten and mistaken and cruel and blind and futile human beings may be. And as a sign to them of this possibility, Jesus says to his disciples, "Have you got something here to eat?" In exchange for this incredible gift of himself, risen from the dead, he asks for a gift in return. It's not much of a gift, just one piece of cold leftover fish from their dinner. But the fishermen give him the fish. And he accepts their gift. And he eats it in their presence. This calls to mind the first time they met him on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. These fishermen, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. When this wandering sage, Jesus, shows up, and he's being followed by an immense crowd that's hanging on his every word, and seeking the healing that flows out of his body. And it's such a crush that he's about to be pushed into the sea. And so he says to the fishermen, "Let me get in your boat and let's set out just a little bit from the shore so that I can preach to the crowd without them, crushing me." And then after he's completed his sermon, he says to Peter, "So let's go out and do some fishing." And Simon Peter says, "Well, we've been fishing all night and did not catch a thing. But if that's what you want to do, we'll do it." And they go out a little ways into the lake and they cast their nets into the water, and sure enough, they haul in such an enormous catch of fish, that their nets are tearing and their boats are sinking. And Peter says to Jesus, "Get away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And Jesus says to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching human beings." And here, at the end of the story, Jesus, the risen Lord, appears again to these fishermen. And having eaten the last little bit of fish that's left from that abundance of God's grace that he showed them throughout his life, that little bit that they have left is enough. And he receives their gift, and he eats them, that fish, and then he reminds them of what his calling to them was all about in the first place. Do not be afraid. From now on, you're going to be catching people. I am sending you out as witnesses, not simply witnesses of my resurrection, but of witnesses to all that that means for you and for all humanity. That God's love, God's compassion, God's forgiveness, God's desire to be reconciled with you is greater than any human sin. Greater than our fear of death, greater than our desire for vengeance. On this morning after Iran launched 200 missiles at Israel in retaliation for Israel's bombing of the Iranian embassy in Syria and killing of top Iranian military commanders, which was in retaliation for something which was a retaliation for something else. You are sent as witnesses to the world of God's reconciling, forgiving love in our risen Savior, Jesus Christ.